Have you ever bought a watch and immediately wondered if you overpaid? I have. My whole team has. That feeling is exactly why we built this. 24 Rolex references. Retail price versus what the market actually pays. Some of these watches are worth exactly what Rolex charges. Some are worth double. A few are worth less than the receipt the moment you walk out the door. Let's find out which is which. 24. Datejust 41 Smooth Bezel. Oyster Bracelet Ref. 126300. Let's start with the trap. Retail sits at $8,950. On the secondary market, you won't recover that. Clean examples on Chrono24 trade between $8,400 and $8,800, below what you paid before transaction fees. The Datejust is Rolex's most versatile watch. It's also the reference where configuration decides everything. Strip away the fluted bezel, swap the Jubilee bracelet for the Oyster, and something quietly disappears from the equation. The visual language that makes a Datejust feel like a Datejust, that slightly ceremonial presence the 5-link bracelet creates, just isn't there on the smooth Oyster combination. It's a perfectly fine watch. The secondary market doesn't price practicality. It prices desire. It prices recognition. The smooth bezel and Oyster bracelet signal to neither the collector nor the casual observer that anything interesting happened here. If you're entering the Datejust, the configuration is the investment decision, not the model. The model is just the starting point. That's the floor. Now, let's start climbing. 23. Datejust 41. Green Ombre Dial Ref. 126334. 2026 debut. At retail, it costs $11,650. Secondary market for the fluted bezel. Jubilee bracelet configuration goes for $13,800 to $14,900. This is what a dial can do to a number. Rolex launched the Green Ombre for 2026, a lacquer gradient that shifts from near black at the outer edge to a saturated forest green at the center. Under direct light, it reads one way. Under candlelight, it's something else entirely. Caliber 3,235 inside. 70 hours of power reserve. The movement has been in the Datejust since 2015. The dial is the entire story. The premium here is real but contained. Secondary market pricing moves with the bracelet and bezel combination more than any other single variable on this reference. Fluted and Jubilee, the premium holds cleanly. Smooth bezel and Oyster bracelet, you're back at the trap from entry 24. Literally the same movement, the same case dimensions, a $4,000 difference in resale value because of a bezel and a bracelet. That's how specific Rolex collecting gets. One entry up and we've already left the discount zone. What comes next is where things start getting interesting. Before we move on to the next part, let me tell you this. Most people don't realize this, but buying a watch the wrong way can cost you thousands, and you won't even notice it until it's too late. That's why I created a complete insider guide to buying watches. The goal is simple. I'll help you stop guessing and start buying smart. You'll find the guide in the pinned comment and description. Now, let's move on to the next part. 22. Oyster Perpetual 36 Jubilee Motif Dial, Ref. 126000 2026 debut. You can buy this for $7,050 retail. But at the secondary market, it costs $9,200 to $10,500. 10 individual colors, pad-printed one at a time, each layer registered precisely against the last. The Jubilee motif, the repeating Rolex pattern Rolex, originally ran on anniversary Datejusts from 1985 to 2022. Came back for the Oyster Centennial in what might be its most assertive execution yet. Not subtle, not trying to be. This is the most accessible 2026 entry point into a new Rolex, and the secondary market knows it. The 36mm OP was already the starter watch for a generation of collectors. Add the anniversary dial and the story writes itself. The collector who won't spend the premium for a steel sport watch, but wants something that carries a legitimate year-specific narrative. This is the reference that ends up in the safe and stays there. I keep coming back to this one. It looks like too much in photos and lands completely differently on the wrist. The collectors who dismiss it today will probably be tracking its auction results in 15 years, calculating what they should have paid in 2026. The anniversary story continues. The next watch takes the centennial in a direction nobody predicted. 21. Oyster Perpetual 41 Centennial Edition. Ref. 124300 100th Anniversary. This replaced the standard Ref. 124300, same 41mm oyster steel case, same caliber 3230. But the gold bezel, the gold twin-lock crown, and the text 100 years at 6 o'clock in place of Swiss made it the quietest collector's piece Rolex dropped this year. Retail runs approximately $7,050. Secondary market for clean examples, $12,500 to $14,000. That premium is symbolic in origin. It's a two-tone configuration that doesn't exist anywhere else in the modern Oyster Perpetual line. Gold bezel, steel bracelet, gold crown. Rolex would normally pair gold bezel elements with gold center links. They didn't here. That small departure from house logic is what collectors are actually buying. The Celebration dial variant from 2020 followed this same curve, purchased by people who thought they were buying a fun everyday watch, now trading at nearly double retail. The market has learned to pay attention to what Rolex does with the OP line. It just takes a few years for the price to catch up to the recognition. A $100 dial feature that added $6,000 of secondary market value. Now, let's talk about the first watch on this list, where the premium is driven not by sentiment, but by pure scarcity mechanics. 20 Sky Dweller stainless steel blue dial, Ref 336934. You will spend $17,750 on retail, and the secondary market will have you spending $19,500 to $21,000. The Sky Dweller is the most mechanically complex watch in continuous Rolex production. The annual calendar with the off-center disc system, the ring command bezel that lets you set 3 separate functions through a single crown position, the Saros module riding above the base movement, serious engineering, and the secondary market barely rewards it. The premium over retail, roughly 15 to 17%, is smaller than the Submariner No Dates premium. Think about that. A watch that took Rolex several years to develop, carrying a mechanism this complex, trades with less urgency than a time-only diver with no complications whatsoever. Complexity doesn't automatically create collectors. Demand creates collectors, and the demand for the Sky Dweller, real as it is, comes from buyers who want to wear this specific watch, not from buyers who want to own this specific reference as a cultural object. That distinction determines secondary pricing more consistently than movement specifications ever will. Blue and green dial variants hold a clear premium over the brighter alternatives. The market has decided. It wants the Sky Dweller to look serious. That vote was unanimous. Premium steel, modest premium. Moving up to where precious metal math turns uncomfortable. 19. Day date 36. Diamond Pavé. Ref. 128349. RBR. For $98,100, you'll get it at retail. On the secondary market, you will spend $89,000 to $93,000. You paid $98,000. The market will return roughly $90,000. That gap opens the moment the purchase is complete. This is not a criticism of the watch. The white gold case, the factory diamond pavé dial and bezel, the President bracelet on a 3-piece solid link. Rolex does not cut corners on gem setting, and the craftsmanship here is real. What the market prices is desirability, not craftsmanship. And high jewelry Rolex has a specific buyer profile that doesn't overlap heavily with the secondary collector market. The woman who buys this watch doesn't need the gray market to validate her decision. She already knows exactly what she wants and why she wants it. But if the watch ever needs to move, whether because taste changed or circumstances did, the number on the other side of that transaction will land about $8,000 below what was left in her account. That's the jewelry tax. It applies here regardless of the maker or market conditions. It has applied for decades. It will keep applying. A watch worth nearly $100,000 that depreciates at purchase. The next one does the same thing, at a lower altitude. 18. Day date 40 yellow gold ref. 228238. Spend $48,000 at retail. At the secondary market, you will splash $42,500 to $45,000. Same mechanism as entry 19. Buy at retail, and the market returns less. The day date, 40 inches yellow gold, has been under secondary market pressure for years, and the January 2026 retail price increase on gold references widened the gap between new and used, without the secondary market closing the distance. Yellow gold is a specific taste. That has always been true, and there's nothing wrong with it. But the current spread between retail and gray market on this reference is historically wide. The collector who pays $48,000 new and needs to liquidate in 3 years will be looking at a meaningful shortfall. There's a simple rule that most experienced collectors apply to modern gold dress watches. Buy them because you want to wear them, not because you're building a position. The gold day date in yellow deserves to be worn. It looks extraordinary. It just does not hold the way a steel sports watch holds. And acting like it does will cost you. 2 consecutive precious metal losses. Then Rolex unveiled an entirely new metal alloy. That's number 17. 17. Day date, 40 inches. Jubilee gold off catalog, 2026. This is the exception. Approximately $58,000 in retail, and at the secondary market, $62,000 to $65,500. Jubilee gold is a proprietary 1/8-carat alloy Rolex developed and manufactured entirely in-house. It combines tones of tender yellow, warm gray, and soft pink into something that doesn't look like yellow gold, doesn't look like rose gold, and doesn't quite look like anything Rolex has made before. That strangeness was completely intentional. Paired with a pale green aventurine stone dial, it recalls the Stella dial day dates from the 70s without copying them. The aventurine's natural shimmer under the Jubilee gold case creates an effect that photographs badly and looks extraordinary in person. That inverse relationship between photo performance and wrist presence is very often the signature of watches that age well in collector esteem. The off-catalog designation confirms what everyone suspects. Production numbers will be a fraction of the standard day-date output. This is an allocation piece, distributed exclusively through inner circle clients at select authorized dealers. The secondary market premium reflects that access constraint as much as the material novelty. If you encounter one offered at or near retail, something unusual is happening. New metal, premium that holds. Now we move into the tier where premiums are measured in waitlist years rather than percentages. 16. Rolex Deep Sea Blue Dial, Ref. 136660D Blue. You will buy this for $15,630 new. And at the secondary market, you will spend $15,200 to $15,900. The Deep Sea is one of Rolex's most technically ambitious objects and one of its weakest secondary performers. 3,900 meters of water resistance. The ring lock system with its 3mm thick sapphire crystal and the helium escape valve. Everything about this case is overbuilt by an extraordinary margin for any realistic dive profile most owners will ever attempt. But the secondary market barely blinks. The Deep Sea case is 44mm, with a case thickness that adds more visual mass than most wrists want or need. The people who love it completely. The problem is that the number of those people circulating on the secondary market at any given time is small enough that pricing stays anchored close to retail. Not because the watch is bad, because the buyer pool for a serious professional dive instrument runs thin when the ocean isn't involved. The D Blue dial, the gradient from black to James Cameron deep blue, is the most visually striking face in the line. It still doesn't move the secondary number. Parity is interesting, but number 15 is where the premium conversation changes register. 15. Explorer 2 Polar White Dial, Ref. 226570. This costs $10,000 from an authorized dealer. On the secondary market, you will part with $11,500 to $12,400. The Explorer 2 doesn't get enough attention in these conversations. Caliber 3000, 285 with the Chronergy escapement, roughly 70 hours of power reserve, a fixed 24-hour hand that's actually functional for anyone crossing time zones on foot rather than by plane, and a date window that does what a date window is supposed to do. The Polar, the white dial variant, commands a clean premium over the black. not a large one, a consistent one. The Explorer 2 secondary market is quiet in the best possible sense. No manic price swings, no allocation battles at the authorized dealer, no internet forums cycling through panic and euphoria every 6 months. This is the anti-hype watch in the current Rolex catalog. You can, on a good day, walk into an authorized dealer and have a real conversation about one without a substantial purchase history attached to the meeting. That accessibility keeps the secondary premium contained, which paradoxically makes it one of the most rational purchases on the entire list. Rational is fine, but there's nothing rational about what comes next. 14. Explorer 1 36mm Ref 124270. You will spend up to $7,700 to get a new piece. Secondary market, $8,200 to $8,800. The smallest secondary premium on this list, and possibly the most honest watch Rolex makes. 36mm, caliber 3230, black dial, 3, white lume plots at 3, 6, and 9. No Arabic numerals, no date. Nothing that isn't directly descended from the watch Edmund Hillary wore on his wrist at the summit of Everest in May 1953. The lineage sounds like marketing. It isn't quite. The Explorer was the first Rolex with a purpose beyond being a Rolex. Everything else followed from that. The minimal premium over retail reflects a market that reads this watch clearly. A tool watch for people who don't need a tool watch, priced at the entry point to serious Rolex collecting, with zero speculative froth attached. The collector who buys the Explorer isn't looking for the premium. They're looking for the watch. That might be the most distinguishing thing you can say about any reference on this list. The purist's choice, unmoved by market enthusiasm. Now, the watch that started every dive watch conversation Rolex ever had. 13. Submariner No Date Ref 124060. Retail goes for $10,050. Secondary market prices range from $12,200 to $13,100. The no-date Submariner crossed the $10,000 retail threshold for the first time in January 2026. That felt like a milestone to people who had been tracking it. The secondary market didn't notice. Clean examples were already trading well above $11,500 on Chrono 24 before the increase arrived, and pricing held steady through it without adjustment. 41mm case, unidirectional rotating bezel, caliber 3230, no date complication, no Cyclops lens. The Submariner 124060 is what happens when a design gets stripped to its functional minimum, and the market decides that minimum is everything it needs. The premium over retail is modest by Rolex sports watch standards. That's precisely why this reference gets recommended as the entry point into steel Rolex collecting, more consistently than any other. It doesn't spike. It doesn't crash. It costs more than it did last year, and it will cost more than it does now. The foundation. Same case, same movement, slightly different math on the date variant. 12. Submariner Date Black Dial, Ref 126610LN. On retail, you'll spend $11,350. The secondary market costs more at $13,500 to $14,200. The Submariner date has accumulated a 27.5% retail price increase over 4 years. 6 annual adjustments, none dramatic individually, all significant in aggregate. And the secondary market tracked it. The premium over retail stays among the smallest in the steel sports category. But the buyer who paid $9,000 for this reference in 2020 is looking at a secondary market value roughly 50% higher than their original outlay. That's not an investment thesis crafted in advance. That's what happens when a watch people actually want keeps getting more expensive while the supply stays flat. The 126610LN is the benchmark reference for the entire Rolex sport watch range. Everything else on this list is compared to it, either as a step up or a lateral move. If you don't know which specific reference you want, start here. Understand why this one holds, and everything else becomes easier to evaluate. Black dial, steady hold. Green dial does something different, and the nickname has an origin story worth knowing. 11. Submariner date, Starbucks green bezel ref, 126610LV. $11,350 at retail, $15,200 to $16,400 on the secondary market. The nickname came from collectors noticing that the green and black color combination on the bezel matched a Starbucks cup. That's it. That's the entire story. And somehow that accidental resemblance is now baked into a secondary premium that runs well above the black dial sibling, despite identical movement, identical case, identical bracelet. The green ceramic bezel against the black dial is doing something the black bezel against the black dial simply isn't. It creates contrast. It catches light differently. It identifies itself from across a table in a way the standard Submariner doesn't. The collector, who wants to be seen wearing a Submariner rather than just wearing one, buys this reference. Since the green Submariner Hulk, the 116610LV, was discontinued in 2020, this reference absorbed a significant portion of that collector base. The Hulk is gone. The Starbucks held the green. The premium reflects that inheritance. Two Submariners, two different angles. Now we leave the dive collection entirely. 10. GMT Master 2 Root Beer, Ref 126711CHNR. Buyers have bought this for $19,400 at retail, and those who got it on the secondary market spent $21,000 to $22,500. The Root Beer is the strongest performing Rolex reference in the current Rolex catalog. Two-tone Everose gold and oyster steel. The brown and black ceramic bezel that revived the original 1954 colorway, and an oyster bracelet that feels more substantial on the wrist than the standard steel equivalent because the gold components add mass without changing the profile. The premium is contained, roughly 15% over retail, and it's consistent. Two-tone Rolex sport watches have historically outperformed their fully gold equivalents on the secondary market, while costing significantly less to acquire at retail. The Root Beer lands correctly on both sides of that equation. There's a collector who visits their authorized dealer regularly with the same request for this reference, gets politely declined every time due to allocation, and eventually pays a modest gray market premium without complaint. That person made the right call. The watch is worth the premium. The wrist feel alone justifies the extra outlay in a way that no spec sheet captures. A premium that earns itself. Now the number that will make every GMT collector either relieved or furious, depending on which side of April 14th they were standing. 9. GMT Master 2 Batman Ref 126710 BLNR. For the retail price, $11,800. Secondary market, $16,800 to $17,500, and moving. The Batman was the Pepsi's less prestigious sibling for years. Black and blue ceramic bezel instead of red and blue, oyster bracelet instead of the Jubilee, slightly lower secondary premium at every comparable price point. Then the Pepsi disappeared. The premium moved the moment the news landed. Collectors who had been watching the GMT segment for years saw this shift coming and moved into Batman inventory ahead of the announcement. If you bought one in 2025, you're sitting on a meaningful gain. If you're looking now, you're buying into a market that is already priced in the Pepsi's absence. The Batman absorbed the Pepsi's gravity. The watch that absorbed the Pepsi's visual identity is a different conversation. 8. GMT Master 2 Sprite Guinness Ref 126710 GRNR. This costs $12,000 on retail and $15,500 to $20,000 on the secondary market. This is some heavy, active upward pressure on the 24, the green and black, the left-handed crown, the reference that Rolex designed for people who wear their watch on the right wrist, which remains either the most thoughtful detail in the modern GMT Master 2 lineup or a solution to a problem nobody asked for, depending on your perspective. Pre-discontinuation, the Sprite's secondary premium was modest and stable. After April 14, the dynamic changed. Chrono24 reported a 500% surge in purchase requests for steel GMT references during March 2026, with active listings dropping roughly 25% as owners pulled inventory off the market in anticipation. The green and black bezel, the only color in the remaining steel GMT lineup that carries any warmth, saw the most pronounced demand compression. Collectors who wanted steel GMT color options had fewer and fewer of them. The Sprite held the green. The pricing reflects that. Let's move on. 7. Yachtmaster 2 Steel, Ref. 226627. In retail, you'll spend about $20,300. Secondary market, $19,500 to $20,800. Barely above retail. On a watch with a regatta countdown complication that no other Rolex reference carries. The Yachtmaster 2 runs the caliber 4161, a movement Rolex developed exclusively for this reference. The programmable countdown function lets a sailing crew set the start sequence directly from the crown, with the regatta timer mechanically synchronized to the main sweep seconds hand. It is, objectively, a more complicated watch than anything else in the steel Rolex sports lineup at a comparable price. And the secondary market treats it like a standard tool watch with modest demand. The explanation is simple and a little unfair. Most people who buy Rolex sport watches don't race sailboats, don't need a regatta timer, and don't want to pay for engineering they'll never use. The Yachtmaster 2 has spent years being the reference that watch journalists respect and collectors overlook. What changed in 2026 is that Rolex brought it back with renewed positioning after a quiet period, and the collector community that had been sleeping on it is starting to wake up. Pre-owned examples of the previous generation are already seeing upward pressure as the new version reintroduces the reference to buyers who'd never considered it. This is the watch on this entire list where the gap between what it is and what the market currently pays for it is the widest. That gap closes eventually. It always does. That said, let's move on to number 6. 6. Land Dweller 40mm White Rolzor, Ref. 127334, launched W&W 2025. Retail, $16,450. Secondary market, $19,900 to $21,200. The Land Dweller arrived at Watches and Wonders 2025, carrying 32 patent applications. 16 of those patents covered the movement alone. The caliber 7135 uses Rolex's Dynapulse magnetic escapement, making the watch inherently antimagnetic without the soft iron Faraday cage architecture that previous antimagnetic Rolex designs required. The flat Jubilee integrated bracelet. The transparent caseback, a first for any Rolex sports reference. The honeycomb dial with oversized numerals at 6 and 9 that split collector opinion immediately and hasn't stopped splitting it. The Royal Oak comparison is impossible to avoid. Same integrated bracelet architecture, same calculated distance from conventional sports watch design, same bracket of industrial elegance applied to a case that could have been more conservative and deliberately wasn't. Rolex didn't copy the Royal Oak, but they understood exactly what Audemars Piguet had been building for 50 years and built a response. Whether the secondary premium holds as distribution normalizes is the open question this reference carries. Non-chronograph, non-GMT tool watch. Expansions tend to compress 10 to 15% within the first few quarters as supply catches up. So far, it hasn't compressed. The authorized dealer waiting lists suggest it won't. Soon. Last year's most disruptive release, still holding its premium a year in. Now the watch that defines what it means to be truly out of reach. 5. Daytona Steel, Panda, Ref. 126500LN0001. Retail will have you spending give or take $16,900. Secondary market, way more, $38,000 to $39,000. The Daytona doesn't respond to your purchase history, your relationship with the authorized dealer, or how long you've been on the wait list. The list for a steel Daytona at most authorized dealers runs between 3 and 7 years for buyers without significant existing purchase history with the brand. That's not a rumor or a complaint. That's the documented experience of collectors who have been trying to buy one at retail for years. The white dial Panda variant sits at the premium end of the secondary range, 125% over retail for pristine examples. The Daytona 126500 regularly trades around $30,000 on the pre-owned market, against a new retail price of $16,900, and the Panda configuration adds a further $8,000 to that floor. The first-time buyer who sees the gray market price and assumes it's inflated hasn't been watching long enough. $38,000 isn't expensive for a steel Daytona in 2026. It's just what steel Daytonas cost now. The retail price is the one that looks fictional. If the standard Panda feels untouchable, what Rolex dropped as an off-catalog release this year is something else entirely. 4. Daytona Rolexium Ref 126502, off-catalog 2026. This is the most technically ambitious Daytona Rolex has ever placed in a steel-based case. You will spend $57,800 on retail. On the secondary market, I only have projections here. That would be $120,000 to $170,000 within the first year, based on comparable off-catalog Daytona performance histories. The Grand Few enamel dial is fired onto 5 ceramic plates at extreme temperature, creating a depth and light response that standard lacquer cannot replicate. The 3 subdials match the main face in full white enamel with no contrasting rings, giving the watch a monochromatic completeness broken only by the red Daytona signature at 6 o'clock. The anthracite Cerachrome bezel uses a newly developed ceramic enriched with tungsten carbide, and its tachymeter numerals are arranged horizontally as a direct callback to the very first Cosmograph from 1963. At $57,800, the 126502 costs more than Rolex's own solid 1.8 carat yellow gold Daytona. More expensive than solid gold, in a steel and platinum case, because of 5 ceramic plates fired in a kiln. That sentence should give you pause, and it still won't matter. This watch sells immediately, to buyers whose names were in the right conversation months before Watches and Wonders opened. But a blog to watch, which reviewed it hands-on, made a point that deserves to stay in the conversation. Even with the enamel dial and the platinum elements, there is a $49,000 gap between this and the standard steel Daytona that doesn't entirely reconcile with the material additions. Rolex's true wizardry is making you want something you almost certainly cannot own. Off-catalog means almost no one gets it at retail. Brand number 3 is in the main catalog, theoretically accessible, and carries one of the most interesting angles on this entire list. 3. GMT Master 2 Batgirl Ref 126710 BLNR on Jubilee bracelet. $11,800 on retail, $18,000 to $19,500 on the secondary market. This is post-Pepsi repricing, of course. The Batman and the Batgirl share the movement, the case, and the bezel. The secondary market prices them differently. The Jubilee bracelet on the black and blue GMT clears 5 to 7% higher than the Oyster equivalent consistently, driven by collector preference for the 5-link architecture on this specific colorway. The Batgirl is now the closest visual analog to the discontinued Pepsi in the active Rolex catalog. Same 5-link Jubilee bracelet, same GMT function, same sport watch proportions. The colorway is blue-black, where the Pepsi was blue-red. That difference is significant to experts and essentially invisible to the person at the dinner table who says, "Nice watch." Collectors who wanted the Jubilee GMT experience at something approaching retail, and who couldn't get the Pepsi before the catalog closed, moved toward the Batgirl with a speed that's visible in the price data. That migration hasn't finished. 2 entries left. Both are Daytonas. Both are measuring their worth against a legacy that needs no introduction. 2. Daytona Steel Black Dial. Ref 126500 LN 0002. Retail? You are looking at around $16,900. Secondary market? $32,800 to $33,500. The Panda got the larger premium. The Black Dial got the larger story. Collector orthodoxy holds that the Panda is the desirable variant. White dial, black subdials, the racing lineage from Paul Newman's personal Daytona to every auction record set in the last 20 years. And collector orthodoxy is correct about the primary market premium, which runs about $5,000 above the black dial at equivalent condition. But the black dial Daytona has a collector base that is more loyal and considerably less interested in what the broader market thinks. The collector who wears this reference often doesn't want the watch that strangers recognize at first glance. They want the one that requires a second look, the one where knowing which variant it is becomes part of the experience. Both dials, same $16,900 retail price. A $6,000 secondary market spread, built entirely from a story collectors told each other over decades until the market agreed to price it that way. No technical difference, no movement variation, just narrative accumulated until it became a number. The number one spot on this list belongs not to the most expensive reference and not to the one with the largest premium, but to the one that in 2026 represents the single most complete transformation in the Rolex secondary market in recent memory. 1. GMT Master 2 Pepsi Ref 126710BLRO. The one you can't buy. We come back here because this is where every other number on this list eventually points. What exists now is a watch that Rolex manufactured for decades, that sat in showcase cases worldwide until 6 weeks ago, and that is now permanently absent from the production line with no announced heir. There is no Coke replacement. There is no successor colorway. The 126710BLRO is, by Rolex's own actions, a closed chapter. The entire secondary market ecosystem for steel sport GMTs reorganized around that fact within a single business day. Every remaining reference absorbed some fraction of the Pepsi's historical demand. The Batman moved, the Batgirl moved, the Sprite moved. None of them are the Pepsi. None of them carry the specific collector gravity of a watch with a name that everyone in a watch conversation recognizes, a lineage back to 1954. When Pan Am pilots were using the original GMT Master to track 2 time zones simultaneously, and a presence in nearly every serious collection assembled in the last 30 years. Unworn examples, with 2026 warranty documentation, are clearing above $40,000. The Submariner Hulk, to use the closest structural parallel, entered discontinued status at around $14,000 secondary and doubled within 2 years. The Pepsi starts from a substantially higher base and has no current production competitor in the same colorway. Those two conditions together change the ceiling in ways that the Hulk's trajectory can't fully predict. So, if you have one, keep it. Unless the offer being made is extraordinary and you'd honestly rather have the cash. If you were watching and waiting for the right moment, the moment was 2024. Maybe early 2025. That window closed permanently on a Tuesday morning in April in a Geneva convention center, while the industry was busy looking at everything else Rolex had to show. Which reference on this list do you own? Drop it in the comments with the year you bought it. Like this video and subscribe.